So many what we now call noir productions emerged out of the US during the 40s and 50s. A lot of the very best were handled by seminal directors from Huston to Mann to Lang, Turner, Dassin, Walsh, Ray, Preminger, or Losey. Others had helmed the one classic, but apparently suggested that said instance was a fluke compared to their other titles, as could be claimed of Nightmare Alley's Edmund Goulding. He has a small sum of other overall commendable films, but a scarce few. Most of Joseph H. Lewis's films are far from shining achievements of that genre or of any other genre label. Polonsky's Force of Evil, that isn't fair. His career had been cut short very infamously by Elia Kazan and the Huac Hounds. H. Bruce Humberstone's I Wake Up Screaming was released the same year as Maltese Falcon and feels like a convicted cliche or retroactive homage from 15 years down the track, and is very finely executed in every affably archetypal respect. Edgar Ulmer's Detour is far and away that director's finest, though he had some other overall worthwhile features, nothing really on the par of 45's Detour. Alan Barron's Blast of Silence is a cracker of a black and white noir. He did not direct much at all otherwise as far as feature films are concerned. And then this brings us to one Phil Karlson in the 1952 riveting, highly watchable experience Kansas City Confidential. It might be safe to assume that Karlson was what we may pretty harshly dismiss as a nothing director. Although I have not seen a vast majority of his films, they do not seem like exemplary monuments of their respective genres, presumably of a similar genre to what Kansas City Confidential is, without its cinematic assertiveness, generally above average script, and largely evocative players. And I note he directed the 63 animal romp called Rampage, starring Mitchum and Hawkins, two of the very greatest leads ever, and rendering the film much more appeal than just its animal footage. As well as the sequel to 71's rat classic Willard, the 72 feature Ben, Ben as in the Michael Jackson song that was a tie-in with some old movie, that Ben. Now wait, I note that Kansas City Confidential was shot by one George E. Discant, who had shot Nicholas Ray's classic noir masterworks They Live by Night and On Dangerous Ground. He also shot the similarly, though not precisely as impactful, A Woman's Secret of 49. Does this change everything? We know, or ought to, that a cinematographer can make a film just as well as a director can, or is vital to even a great auteur doing so, and possibly working with such a visually inclined convicted artists such as Nick Ray might have rubbed off on Discount, because Kansas City Confidential can seem like the lower budget garage predecessor to Kubrick's 56 exercise, The Killing. Easy to enjoy by most fans of the film noir continuum and possibly for most audiences in general. 2. Willing to watch something out of sick novelty's sake, I presume, from the olden days, 1952, tell your friends all about it, a quaint delusion of feeling cultured, share it on social media, spice up a closet normie's signaling profile. It is an incredibly above average exercise for a film which serves quite arguably little purpose now beyond a reminder of what it felt like in a different, more relaxed, less fractured, and actually more so purposeful time. To live in the now is to recognize that every time you sit down and watch a film, for the very most part, it is to run away from the world, to relish in a little comforting photographic/animated. Live-action cinematography is a form of animation, as we might be ideally aware. Composition, ignoring the more banal duties of either searching for some compromised career to earn income and pay for one's residential accommodation, or for their significant others' social life and superiority complex contests with their friend circle, or the less selfish though inevitably unpleasant commitment to a more virtuous cause, be it socially, politically, or in regard to one's own procured family unit. The feature film is a temporal distraction from the anguishes of the modern day-to-day cycles, and not necessarily always as some uplifting, empowering intensifier to potentially inspire one to make better of the spaces outside the screen, perhaps as our favourite books, songs/music, or even paintings, images I want to do. This is not what the feature film always was. At one time, it was the apotheosis of the participatory cultural experience, the culmination of the society's resources, into one ambitious undertaking of techno-aesthetic assertiveness, rather than just pop it on like an episode of some sitcom or quiz show or soap opera and just, kill time while you feel bored and miserable about going to work the next day. But films didn't have to be that. As I said, at one time they were, as other forms of media can be, just great signifiers and fantastic reminders of how powerful the world can be and what you can potentially at least want to shift about the environment around you. your own or something more macro on a macro level. And I'm not even referring specifically to the 1950s or 60s. When I'm referring to a previous time, I'm not even referring specifically to the 1950s or 60s when this picture, Kansas City Confidential, would have been shown in the cinema or aired on a television throughout the subsequent decades of that century. No, I refer to the 2000s, not all that long ago. When watching this film on a DVD, before the internet was just omnipresent, beyond a single room in one's house, prior to the internet just having everything ready for download or to be streamed, ensuring all existing media eternally would feel less, perhaps just slightly special. Back when you had only a limited trawl of DVDs and then what one could rent from the local tape or disc rental proprietor, it was still engaging in something of a prospective zenith of cultural engagement. At home with nothing to do, why not watch some DVDs? Now, with our internet, with access to organised, sincere, courageous activism, the privilege to catalogue and summarise all knowledge within databases and inherently arrogant nutshellings of human history, with the omnipresent desire in most others to just vapidly perform and do everything within the ghastly prism of how will this come across on social media, even if the possibility to learn on any subject you wanted. No more excuses to avoid some recreational productivity. One didn't need to worry about your local library not having works on the laws of physics, while your computer has them online, as free PDFs or for sale via Amazon, or hey, here's some series of university lectures on your YouTube. It's a bit less difficult to feel like you simply didn't have the access or resources or ability to only purchase or borrow a select sum of books. And superficial as these feelings might be, they do add up psychologically to make the simple viewing of an older film not quite the amazing all-encompassing escape which I think at one time it more so used to be, whether in the 20th century, even in the itself, or even in the recent 2000s. Relishing in escapism doesn't make sense anymore. It is decried as the behaviour of young male insular so-called political radicals, some depressingly manosphere adjacent. They do not care enough about the issues, about performing on social media, on validating others' desires to make surface-level impressions upon others. They wish to live free and to do what they wilt, what thou wilt, which is seen as an ugly, plausibly middle-class bulwark of the capitalist consume-and-numb-yourself market economic kraken. Although I would insist on referencing Herbert Marcuse's The Aesthetic Dimension, in which he suggests that all those who relish in escapes via human art are validating the concept of some societal revolution, and would not be challenging converts to the causes of some wider political liberation. This, in a respect, is why I came to be more determined to take fairly seriously the political dimension of one's existence, because the concept of the escape, being simply a distraction from a 9-to-5 soul decay, was quite painful compared to how genuinely empowering and existentially uplifting these works of art could be in a more freer and more so liberated scenario. How such works felt as a primary school or high school student, and then for less time, a university student, compared to just these glossy compositions to serve as material to look at while we munch on potato chips and swell tins of cheaper beer. And for most of history, the celebration, the enthused fans of these noirs just loved the concept of sitting back and watching these films, a bit less interested in the more compositional triumphs or as to how they can influence how we perceive space and representation and how they impact our own processing of the shapes around us in general life. For the last decade, this was culturally, psychologically viable, that the act of just, escapism being something of a zenith of a kind of cultural participation. That is, when it didn't feel like the act of someone who wished they could turn back the clock chronologically or culturally, was the semi-recent 2000s. And films like Kansas City Confidential can firmly remind one of what films meant to us at one time, be it upon the moment around its initial release, or what it meant to sit back and watch a DVD in the 2000s, a genuinely exalted experience, at one time, the zenith of one's home entertainment. Now it is just one of many things that one can achieve via the internet. Watching a movie, watching some show, acquiring something to read, tepid YouTube drama or Politico, team sports, trivialities. There just does not seem to be much purpose to watching films in this time and place. And where I'm not aspiring to direct my own films during my own time, and more of them at that, I don't know if I would feel really justified in watching films. It certainly might feel far less fulfilling. But what can we do to change this feeling? I don't know, maybe disintegrating shame is the way to go. I see the most wicked peoples in our society have no care to summon the sensation of shame within their own personal pathologies, and so why ought those of us who strive to be partly moral or attempt to be considerate to make some positive change for the rest of the world around simply ourselves? All I will say here is stand up for yourselves, because on your deathbeds, if you are conscious, you will wish you did. And no matter when you find yourself kneeling before these, hypothetical heavenly gates, you will wish that you committed to what you really wanted and stridently believed, lucidly aware but an attempt at happiness born from compromise will entail only a continually compromised happiness at the end. And any happiness, sincere happiness, at having stuck to one's own threshold of beliefs and their truth, a moral truth, a personally logical truth, or a socially inconvenient truth, even, will be far, far more potent than any and all compromised happinesses, which will only appear on a surface like happiness, without having the scent, taste, or feel of actual undeniable human happiness. I assume this film won't make you feel as briefly depressed as it had me, but I just wrote myself out of it. You don't need antidepressants when you can type yourself out of an existential cognitive quasar, but be warned that may just embolden you to keep up avoiding meaningful participation in the workforce and social economy, the smoking of nicotine, being committed to, or the feasting on quite comfortable foods at that as well. But if that effectively eliminates depression, then that is the vital concern, because the dissolution of one's depression, or wider society's depression, is inherently mortally a worthwhile venture, regardless of what it does to a Roger Scruton-inspired interpretation of English or Western European historical epochs as fulfilling utopias. To that just sit down and shut up pathos of English language conservatism, that wake up and smell the roses school of do your proper boring duty, I do firmly believe that one's depression, when not rooted in grief, which I have felt cruelly in my life also, is rooted in a preoccupation with the thoughts of others, and if you choose to politely damn them in your thoughts and go forth, you might risk a financial erraticism or fluxus, social derision, political scorn, or even outright romantic and or sexual isolation, but I guarantee you that depression will return and fester if you compromise. And if you're still feeling depressed in your lavish mansion, whilst out conversing or drinking with identified friends, lying next to the mother of your children, or cultivating some level of wider social adoration or positive fame, you'll be too far gone to meaningfully deal with your feelings at that stage, and may be doomed, without drastic action, to be trapped forever.